And standing in for Superintendent Barnes, playing the part of Superintendent Barnes, will be Deputy Superintendent Dr. Carolee Turner-Little.
Good evening, Board Chair Mallow, board members, Deputy Superintendent Dr. Carolee Turner-Little. I'm Tim Rogers, Manager of School Planning, here to present to you this evening the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance School Capacity Charts for your review and approval to forward to the County Council. The school capacity charts, I gotta click that, I forgot that. The school capacity charts are utilized as part of the residential growth management process by the Howard County Department of Planning and Zoning. The process also includes an application for allocations and a roads test. The board and Hcpss is required to update the school capacity charts annually for the school's test. The annual report lists the projected capacity utilization for each school and elementary region. Capacity utilization is the projected K through 12 enrollment divided by K through 12 capacity. Schools or regions that are projected to exceed the thresholds listed in the law are identified as constraints to new future residential development. The thresholds for identification as constrained are 105% for elementary schools, 105% for elementary regions, 110% for middle schools, and 115% for high schools. These calculations are based on the projection from the June 2023 feasibility study and the capacities listed in the most recent board-requested capital improvement program. Individual schools or regions that show a capacity utilization less than the percentage noted are considered open for new residential development for the school's test. When a school or region meets the utilization threshold to be constrained in any year, the capacity utilization number for that year is indicated in red type and with the letter C. Open schools and regions are black text. Of note, in constrained elementary regions, even schools shown individually as open are actually constrained based on their region. In the lower sample chart on the slide, Hollyfield Station and Manor Woods and Waverly are shown individually to be open, but are actually counted as constrained due to their location within the constrained northern region. The 2024 elementary schools capacity chart is included in attachment 2 of the board report. The test year in this chart is 2027-28 and reflects the capacity utilizations rates with the Board of Education requested FY25 capital budget capacity projects and the feasibility study 2023 projection. For the 2024 Apfo school capacity chart, 15 elementary schools are identified as constrained. One region, the northern region, is constrained as well, which brings the total number of constrained elementary schools to 18. For the 2024 Apfo school capacity chart, 6 middle schools are identified as constrained. The region test does not apply at the middle school level, and the schools shown with the letter A next to their name are slated for additions in the FY25 board requested capital budget. The chart reflects the added capacity in the year in which that addition is planned to open. None of these projects will impact the test year of 2027-28. The middle schools that are identified as constrained are Dunlogan, Folly Quarter, Hammond, Patapsco, Patuxent Valley, and Thomas Viaduct. On the high school school capacity chart, no schools are identified as constrained for the test year of 2027-28. The two additions for Centennial and Oakland Mills are shown as impacting the capacity utilization for those schools in the years in which they are planned to complete. Neither of those impacts the test year of this chart. In addition to the capacity charts, the ordinance also requires submission of several pieces of information, which include state and local capacities, the year of last redistricting for each school, a chart showing the portions of projected enrollment increase due to several housing factors, capacity budget pages showing current and future funding assumptions, and a listing of approved and in-process subdivision plans. These items are included in the provided board report as attachment 3. Of note, the chart on page 9 of the report in attachment 3 is intended to be the notice to the County Council of the schools that have reached 95% capacity utilization and are projected to exceed 110% capacity utilization within the next 5 years. That attachment also includes potential solutions based on the June 23 feasibility study and the FY 25 board requested long-range master plan as required. Upon approval, this report will serve as the required notification. Tonight, I'm seeking board approval to submit the school capacity charts and supplemental information to the Howard County Council. This chart will then be pre-filed with the County Council on May 23rd and the legislation introduced on June 3rd. A public hearing is scheduled for June 18th with a council vote on July 1st. I can take any questions that you have at this time. Thank you.
Ms. Gates.
I guess my question is, so the capacity, when you're talking based on reading your report, you're talking about seats, right? So you're talking specifically about seats, bodies and seats as far as capacity. Is that correct?
The capacity would be the seats and the bodies and the seats would be the projected enrollment.
Okay, so when we have schools that have to have storage and they're using storage and space within the schools that's compacting the schools and the space in the schools, we don't take that into consideration because we have schools that have to store paper due to certain type where they have to maintain certain type of files, and so that's in a room. And so we go into schools that are actually like congested and don't have any more room. So why wouldn't we take in consideration the availability of space instead of specific seats?
So I visit many of those schools as well because they often ask questions about space usage and getting additional relocatable classrooms to support their needs.
Right.
And what I can say in terms of the capacity is that the capacity number is based on a board-approved methodology. And it's focused on counting classrooms, also called teaching stations in the methodology, and assigning a number of students to each of those teaching stations. So I would, and generally speaking, the schools that have needs for non-classroom spaces, like you mentioned, are also going to show up as crowded in our, or in terms of high utilization in our reporting.
But not in this particular report, but another report.
Yeah. Well, there's no specific number to reflect, for instance, a storage space shortage. But
Right.
generally, the schools that have those shortages are also showing up as high utilization schools in charts like this one.
Okay, but you're saying that this report based on the board establishing it, so that means the board can possibly look at it differently, and revisit that policy. Because again, I mean, the whole purpose I thought of this based on what you have in here is to talk about space for students. And so if they have to retain documents for a certain amount of years and they don't have anywhere else to put them, but in, let's say, a vacant classroom, so that means they don't have room for the students to go in it, it's still space. So, I mean, you answered the question, but I don't necessarily like the way this is. And just like I was in Elk Ridge Elementary School, and they feel like they are busting at the seams, but yet it doesn't come up on your chart. So, I just want to throw that out there. So I will see if we can bring this back up for discussion with this board. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. And I'll mention that the main purpose of this report is to provide the school capacity charts for the Apfo ordinance to the county. But I'll be back next month with the feasibility study where we can talk more about strategies to relieve crowding in various ways.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for your work. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, Ms. Watts.
Mr. Rogers, I may be getting ahead of you for next month, but I'll just ask my questions. So I was looking at, and thank you for responding to my my questions that I sent ahead of time. I was looking at, for example, let me try to organize my question. So let me look at high schools. It's based on the data that you presented. It doesn't look like we are in need of a 14th high school. And my question is this what you're seeing as well?
Right, so on the APFO chart that was provided in the report, you can see that high school capacity utilization going forward. And I would, this report includes years up to 2036, 37. That's a great distance into the future in terms of enrollment projections. However, the majority of these years show a utilization countywide at the high school level of between 97 and around 101%. So I think that is a pretty strong indication that we've got probably almost as many seats as we need, and there will still be some schools that exceed the school system's target utilization of 90 to 100%, and those are the schools that every year in the feasibility study we'll look at for strategies to provide relief from that crowding. And we will still have Marriott's Ridge as the highest utilized elementary school in this projection at around 110% to 112% going forward. So there will still be a need for some seats around the county, but to the level of funding a major capacity project like a new high school, I would say that this enrollment projection does not support that.
Thank you. Okay, and then the next thing I had a question about was Bryant Woods, and maybe you'll talk about this more next month. I think my overall question really is about pre-K seats and how we can somehow account for them, because they're adding capacity and yet they're not counted. Is there a thought process on how we can better account for the pre-K seats, especially as they're coming on board with Blueprint?
So at the moment, they're accounted for separately from this process, mainly due to the fact that up until recently, we've been unable to project in the same way pre-K need as we do kindergarten through 12 need. And that's for a variety of reasons, starting with the fact that these programs are even under Blueprint, are not mandatory. So it's an elective participation, as well as they have an income qualification. So historically, we have handled it by program need, we've managed it by program, and each year we work with the staff that manages early childhood programming to identify needs and areas where we can provide additional capacity. And I think going forward for the near term, that's how it's going to be handled. But as we are able to get more Blueprint pre-K seats in the system and get more students enrolled under those Blueprint provisions, we will have some historical data where we can begin to apply our projection methodology and incorporate them in a way similar to how we handle K through 12 projections.
I think for the Apfo conversation, I just want to make sure that we are able to convey this to County Council, that we still have an unaccounted for group of students coming into the system. So when they're asking some of these capacity questions, that we are able to communicate that as well.
Ms. Watts?
Yeah.
Dan Lubley, Acting Chief Operating Officer. Can I ask Mr. Rogers if he can expand specifically on pre-K, how the projections are based off of K through 12 and not pre-K, but the spaces that the pre-K students utilize are also not calculated in the capacity of the schools?
Yes, feel free.
Sure, yeah, I can definitely do that. So each year, we work with coordinators of the pre-K programming, and on the number of students and classroom need that they anticipate for the next school year. And then we work to identify locations where those programs can expand, and we can allocate classrooms to those programs. Once that happens, those classrooms are no longer counted for K through 12 capacity, and the students in the pre-K programs are also not counted as projected enrollment. So they're accounted for in that they're managed separately and not part of the APFO capacities or projected enrollment. Does that help explain a little bit?
Okay, so to summarize, you're finding pre-K classrooms, putting a student count in them, and then removing that occupied space from the overall capacity of that school.
Correct.
Okay. So, okay, my next question is, and maybe I'm trying to think which ones you're not going to. So, I see there's some underutilized middle schools. Can you speak to how that, because we also don't want to be way under capacity, which is going to happen with some of the middle schools I'm looking at. Can you speak to how that may be adjusted? And maybe this is part of the conversation for next time too.
We can get into more detail on that in the next report in June with the feasibility study. For the test year shown in the AFO report, I note a few middle schools that are under the 90% mark, Lake Elkhorn, Murray Hill, and Wild Lake. And for those three, I think there's a specific answer. So with Lake Elkhorn Middle School, that's shown as just under the threshold of 90%. And one thing that will come into play with Lake Elkhorn is when the Oakland Mills addition opens and boundaries are adjusted to utilize that capacity that's added at Oakland Mills. I would anticipate that there will be changes to Lake Elkhorn's boundary as well. So there will be an opportunity to fully utilize Lake Elkhorn at that time. And then with Oakland Mills Middle School, as you know, there's a capacity project planned there. It's just under the 90% threshold, with enrollment there expected to more or less stay where it is, shown in the test year, around 450 to 460 students. So it would, without an addition, be right around that 90% mark. Again, with the addition and the addition of almost 200 seats, we anticipate utilizing those seats and having Oakland Mills utilized within that target range. And then for Wild Lake Middle School, you'll see in the later years of this projection, the enrollment does grow into that 90 to 100% threshold. So we anticipate that school will, within the 10-year planning period, be utilized within the target range.
Okay, and Oakland Mills Middle School will be really underutilized when the extra 200 seats come on, is what you're saying. And so we're going to have to do a boundary adjustment to help fill that school.
Indeed.
And what does that do for the overall capacity for middle schools when Oakland Mills Middle and Dunlogan come on? Like, I know you spoke to the overall capacity at the high school level. What about the overall capacity at the middle school level?
So those additions are included in this chart in the year that they're anticipated to open based on the FY25 capital budget. And you'll see that as we go forward into the later years of the chart, the overall middle school capacity utilization does end up around 100% to even slightly under 100% when we get into the 13th, 14th, 15th year of the projection that's shown here. So I think that adding those seats will go a long way towards meeting the countywide need for middle school seats once we adjust boundaries to use that capacity.
Okay, so in summary, high school capacity, we may not need to build any additional high schools, and middle school capacity, we may not need to build any additional middle schools if the projections hold true.
Yeah, there's a couple notes here that, again, next month I'll provide a little more detail on, but one being that boundary adjustments will be needed to utilize the capacity that we build in the coming years. And then the other being that this is based on what we know about enrollment trends at this time, and that will evolve as things like interest rates for housing change and the county general plan goes through all of the legal requirements to be implemented in the coming years, and the development picture for the county changes. So at the moment, this is what we see as we hone in on some of these enrollment trends coming out of the pandemic, but it will evolve as other factors evolve as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next up is Dr. Liu.
Well, thank you for the report. I have a question about elementary schools. So when I look at these regions, it seems like several regions have a higher percentage of schools which are over capacity. For example, southeastern, there are 5 out of 7 schools that are over 100%. And also for northern, there are 3 out of 6 overcapacity. But when I look at the total number of region totals, it seems like northern is 106.2%, and the southeastern is 103.1%. So I want to ask your perspective. So if we want to build a new elementary school, which area do you think will be in great need? Because when I look at the region total was the number of schools that are overcapacity, those two regions actually, they don't really agree with each other. So if I pick one criteria, it won't tell the big picture. So I want to ask your opinion.
Sure. So this data that, the first year that's shown in these charts is the test year for the Apfo chart, which is school year 27, 28. And I just wanted to point that out, that that's year 3 of our projection. And then, so when we present the feasibility study next month, we'll be planning from next year forward. So it will include the more recent, the closer years as well. And then one of the factors is capacity utilization at each school. And when we're planning for capacity, we're not restricted by the Apfo regions. These are regions that are applied per the Department of Planning and Zoning and the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance. So we will look at schools geographically and within feed patterns, and plan accordingly based on capacity utilization, and not just the capacity utilization, but also the number of seats needed to bring those schools within the target capacity utilization range of 90 to 100%. So it may be the case that even though, as shown on the school capacity chart, the southeastern region is utilized less so than the northern region, when we look at the difference between the projected enrollment over the next 10 years and the capacity for those schools, the number of seats that are needed by that grouping of schools may be higher than the number of seats needed by the northern schools to be within the target range.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. My next question is related to region Columbia West. I think Ms. Watts also mentioned the Brentwood, because when I first look at the table, actually, the first number came to my mind is Brentwood. It's 131.8%. That's really high. And in the same region, I saw that Swansfield Elementary School, 79.4%. Also, there are 2 other schools very close to 90%. So I see an imbalance about school utilization within the same region. So could you clarify what's the reason why we observe this imbalance? Because unlike other regions where we see more like overcrowding, but here I really do see one school is very overcapacity, and the other schools, they are way below the 100% utilization.
Right. So the boundaries in these Columbia West elementary schools were adjusted a few times in recent redistrictings. And as we know, with the pandemic, a lot of the things that we thought were happening with enrollment trends changed. So where we might have thought before the pandemic that Bryant Woods would take longer to reach this point, or maybe not reach this quite so high in terms of capacity utilization, at this point, coming out of the pandemic, we're growing in confidence that it will reach this point. Also of note, the capacity of Bryant Woods was adjusted last year to account for a needed expansion of pre-K and special ed programs. So like I explained earlier, we reduced the capacity of the building by, I think it was 2 classrooms to account for that expansion. So that's another reason why in previous studies the capacity utilization may not have looked as high. And then in the feasibility study next month, we can have a deeper discussion during that presentation about the ideas around possibly redistricting within that region to utilize the available capacity at adjacent schools, and any other solutions that the board would like to suggest or that we write about in the feasibility study.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is for that region, it has some boundary adjustment, and then at that time, the prediction was based on pre-pandemic data. And due to the impact of pandemic, it has great impact on school utilization. That partially caused what we see here, the imbalance. And then in the feasibility study, you are going to propose some potential solutions to see how we address this imbalance of school utilization.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, Ms. McCoy.
Okay, thank you for the report. I'm still new to this. So you referred to you're following policy, board policy. What policies are you making reference to? You said, well, you know, you're kind of constrained by board policies. What policies are you making reference to?
Well, the policy that defines the target capacity utilization range is policy 6010. And that guides a lot of what we do in terms of boundary adjustments and planning for capacity solutions. The county adequate public facilities ordinance is the code, the county code that requires specifically what's to be contained in the capacity charts, as well as all the supplemental reporting that comes with it. And then I'm not sure what other policies I might have mentioned. Was there a specific?
No, you
item
just
that-
said policies, and I'm
Okay.
wondering what policies are you referring to? Because I'm not familiar with the numbers.
Okay.
In particular, where you're, because I'd like to go back and
There was
read.
the capacity calculation methodology, which is a board-approved methodology. I'm not sure where that shows up in policy, but that's, we bring the board the methodology to be approved, and the board votes to approve the way that we calculate
Okay.
capacities.
Mr. Lubley, are you familiar with the policy number? I
I
just
think it's
want to
just
see the
defined,
policy.
it may be defined in 6010 that it's to be calculated according to board-approved methods.
That is correct. Again, Dan Lubley, Acting Chief Operating Officer. It is policy 6010.
Okay.
In the 6000 series governs the operation of school construction and school planning, but it's specifically 6010 that deals with the utilization of methodologies.
Okay, so is this another one of those policies that we need to go back and examine? Because I don't know policy numbers, Dr. Perry, but we're looking, we have a committee now that is examining how we come up with capacity. You know, determining what schools need to have their maintenance done or whatever. So when you refer to policy, it's like kind of a scapegoat kind of thing. Well, you all made the policy, so this is where we are. So if there's something wrong with the policy, I would like to be able to refer to it and then determine whether or not we need to revisit it and you know, modify it a bit. Because if the policy is putting us in positions where we have these conditions that, you know, would not be per the policy, you know, were for not the policy, I would like for the board to consider changing.
I think policy 6010 as a whole is effective. It's been reviewed, I've been with the school system for 14 years, and it's been reviewed at least 4 times and modified those times within that 14-year time frame. And with regard to the capacity mentioned in that policy, we're currently reviewing capacity calculation methodologies, and we'd like to come to the board later this year with revisions, potential revisions to that policy, to that methodology, and seek board approval for a revised methodology that may take into account some of these items that are brought up that aren't captured in a strictly classroom and students per classroom calculation.
Okay, thank you. So my question is it the policy or is it decisions that were made by previous boards? Sort of like when we made the allowance when Guilford Park came on board that, you know, we had the fiasco with the buses, what, 26 extra buses? So is it because of previous decisions that have been made that compound the issue of capacity?
I think it's just a matter of the thinking needs to be updated, the methodology needs to be updated to reflect how we use schools in 2024 versus 2013, 2011, and 2009.
So and this is my last question, I think just before I came on the board, there was a new, I don't know if it's a policy or standard for classrooms, I forgot what you call it, the classroom size.
Are you talking about the design?
Yeah. Yeah.
The standards by
The
which we
standards.
design
Right,
a elementary school, middle school, high school?
So those design constraints, do they also add to the issue? Because as we look at newer school, if we're comparing what we want for the future with what we have now, I'm wondering if board decisions are just making things much worse than they need to be, because we're doing and making decisions in isolation versus really having a project management approach to understanding all of our decisions.
Mr. Lubley may want to add detail regarding the ed specs, but I think, like I said about the methodology, I think it's just a matter of it's time to update some of our practices, our specs, our
That's what
methodologies,
the ed specs.
reflecting modern school needs and school uses. And that's the specs are another topic that is being worked on. We brought you a middle school ed spec recently for approval, and the others are being worked on.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gates?
Can you go to attachment 3 on page 4? I'm referencing that, where it has the local and the state. Can you explain for me what that spreadsheet is? I mean, the way I'm interpreting it is that the state has reviewed the schools and they have their view on what capacity is, and then we have our view on what it is. Is that the case?
That's essentially what yes. The state has a formula for calculating school capacities where they assign a capacity number to different types of rooms based on their use and size. We have a similar formula. The funding for state projects is based on the state formula, but they allow LEAs to plan using local capacities. And it comes down to, again, the assignment of different capacity ratings per room and per use. So it's just different formulas.
Okay, so with that being said, I'm going back to Board Member Watts asked you a question in reference to high school, and you stated that that we wouldn't need another high school. We wouldn't need high school 14, and I mean I have an issue with that because. Again, based on state calculations, we definitely are over capacity in the majority of our high schools. And even from your capacity, most of the high schools are 90% or more, at least about 10 high schools that are 90+% or more. I think it's 2 that's 90 something and the other ones are 100 something. And so again, I'm trying to understand how can you absolutely say that? And the numbers that you have in here is from 2023. So that's the only, your sheet was from 2023. So we're already at 90 and 100. And so we're looking at you're talking about 25, 26 or 26, 27. So the odds are we're going to be moving forward. And so if in fact we do need a high school, then because of conversations like this, then we wouldn't build it. We would just give them a movable classroom. We'll just put whatever. I apologize because I don't call it the right thing, but the trailers, which I know you don't call it that. So we would just add that and continue to add that as that is a solution instead of planning for the fact that right now we do need it. And the area that high school 14 is supposed to be, the schools that potentially may be relieved would be a Long Reach, a Howard. Again, we're looking at Guilford, and that's not even because we're transitioning with that. We don't even know what that would look like. And I think that some of the kids from that area also go to Oakland Mills, if I'm not mistaken, but I say that to say, or Hammond, I say that to say, for us to say we don't need it, is kind of dangerous when you're not 100% sure of that. And I guess for me, I want us to be ahead of any challenges, not behind it and trying to figure out how we're going to do it. And again, throw kids in a trailer. So I guess the state is saying we're over capacity, but we're saying we're not. So I'm with Board Member McCoy that we do need to revisit the policy because the state is looking at all the schools across the state. So I think that we need to kind of understand what their projections are and why they have that formula. Not to say the state is always right, but I think in our situation, we need to stop trying to act like we just have a solution, and that's putting kids outside of the regular school structure. I don't think that's fair to any of them, and that's what we have been talking about with all of these new schools, that we're kind of tired, and the communities are telling us they're tired of that being the solution. I think we should be pre-planning. So high school 14, based on these numbers and even your numbers, I think is something that is needed.
Thank you, Ms. Gates. I think some of your concerns are outside of the chart that we need to pass tonight, and I think that the Office of School Planning and Department of Operations has heard that, and we can bring it back up for discussion during the feasibility study presentation, which will occur in June.
Well, I think so. In all due respect, Ms. Chair, we're sending this report over to the council. So all the information that we send over to the council is feeding them information of what our desires are. So when the way that this presentation is going, if the information is going based on what the speaker said, he answered Ms. Watts and said, no, we don't need another high school 14. So it is a part of my concern in this particular presentation, because this is the data that he said he's delivering to the council. And again, it's based on the board policy. Thank you.
Thank you. What I meant to convey was that, in fact, the adequate public facilities ordinance chart, it's germane to the discussion and the topic and the presentation. It's not germane to the decision. The decision that we need to make tonight is whether or not this chart can be provided to the county council. And I have one question before we take a motion so that we can stop for dinner. And my one question is, for Bryant Woods, given the small size of it and given the proximity to Faulkner Ridge, has Faulkner Ridge coming online been part of those calculations to remove the pre-K and special ed classrooms, possibly to Faulkner Ridge, so that Bryant Woods could come back under capacity?
It is not part of these calculations, but that is a conversation that could take place when we get closer to Faulkner Ridge being complete.
Okay, great. I would like to, can anyone, I'm now taking motions to approve the school capacity charts and attached supplemental data. Dr. Chen?
Sorry, I confused that. So you make a motion or?
No, I'm asking for a motion to be made. Would you like to make a motion?
Sure, I can make a motion. So I move that the Board of Education approve the school capacity charts and the attached supplemental data for supplemental to the Howard County Council.
Second?
I have a motion by Dr. Chen and a second by Ms. Mallow to move approval of the school capacity charts and attached supplemented data for submittal to the Howard County Council. Dr. Liu?
Yes.
Ms. Ayaz?
Yes.
Ms. Watts?
Yes.
Ms. McCoy?
No.
Ms. Gates?
No.